Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto. Excuse me. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas. On Thursday, May 25th, we're getting ready for Memorial Day here in a couple of days, and obviously we salute all of you with the upcoming Memorial Day. I hope you have a good weekend with your family, and of course, remember the meaning of the holiday. We remember those who paid the ultimate price on Memorial Day. So this is one holiday where I think we need to, at least for a little bit, think about those many, many brave people who fought and died for the United States and for freedom over the years. Today we're going to be chatting about Star Wars. Star Wars was released on this day in 1977, and it's really quite an amazing story when we look back at it right now. When you think of what Star Wars became, and I'm not sure that they thought this when it was released on this day in 1977. I'm going to share a couple of facts with you about what became of that incredible summer of 1977 when Star Wars pretty much dominated everything in the movies and even in the radio pretty much. You had Star Wars disco music happening shortly after that. We do remember very quickly on this day in 1793 that Father Stephen Theodore Baton, I think that's how you pronounce it, Badin, that he was ordained. He became the first American priest ordained in the United States. Of course, there had been others before him, but this was in the United States after the country had become the United States, obviously during the colonial period and the pre-constitutional period. There were many priests who were ordained in North America, I assume, but it was Father Baton who became the first American priest ordained in the United States after it became the country that we now know. So, 1793, Father Baton, and I believe there's a connection to Notre Dame with him. I was not able to read a great deal about it, but I think there is a connection to Notre Dame University and Father Stephen Theodore Baton. Just a quick update. I have a post over at the American Thinker this morning where I talk about the Democrats and the middle class. There's a lot of talk about the Democrats when, they want to connect with the middle class. They feel that they have to go back and connect with the middle class. So Tim Kaine, who was Hillary Clinton's running mate in the last election, the Tim Kaine of the Clinton-Kaine ticket, he wrote an article where he's basically saying that the Democrats have to reconnect with the middle class. That for too many people, the economic message of the Democrat Party is, redistribution and taxes and so on. And he's exactly right. Senator Kaine is exactly right. But the question I would ask him is, why do so many people associate the Democrat Party with redistribution and taxes? Maybe it has something to do with the way that they talk about the economy, with the way that they talk about economic activity. I think it does. And I think that's the reason why they have such a hard time connecting, I wouldn't say just the middle class, with people who pay taxes, period, whether it's the middle class, even the upper middle class. There's a lot of people out there who are technically, let's say, pretty well off. But they're well off because they work very hard at a business, and these are the people paying the taxes. And when you see, for example, the way Democrats have reacted to the Trump budget by pretty much saying that Donald Trump wants to throw babies out in the streets and take away food from babies, well, that's exactly why, Mr. Kaine, the party has a very difficult time connecting with the middle class. Maybe if you would actually talk to the middle class and you would actually spend as much time as you do with everybody else, spend as much time talking to the middle class, the people who are paying the taxes, who are running businesses, who are starting businesses, who are out there in this amazing American economy, maybe if you would actually spend more time with those people or listening to them or talking to them, maybe you would have a little bit of success with the middle class. Well, let's talk about Star Wars. It came out on this day in 1977. And let me just share with you some of the statistics of Star Wars. $461 million. That's how much the movie made. Now, of course, that was 40 years ago. And, that was a lot of money. It's a lot of money today, but that was even more money back in 1977. $800 million when you consider the international impact of the movie. Now, I always thought that Star Wars was more than a movie. I always thought that it was a marketing bonanza, that it was something that really went beyond anything that we had ever seen before in the movies. Now, we would see it again later with other movies, but clearly up to that moment, I don't think that any movie had ever been marketed the way Star Wars was marketed. And I think that contributed to the fact that there were 7 Oscars a year later. Many of the characters in the movie have become, names that we often even use in politics. These characters, Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Princess Leia. Is that her name, Leia or Leia? Then, of course, you have C-3PO, which is one of the robots. Then you have R2-D2, another one of the robots. And then the bad guy, I guess, with Darth Vader. But all of these characters, very often, for example, you'll hear references to Darth Vader when you're talking about a political figure you don't like, for example. You'll hear references to him. So, to say the least, this was a very consequential movie. I thought it was extremely well done. The marketing of it, of course, as I said, it was extremely well done, and that's the reason why the movie had the success that it had. It was a marketing bonanza, to say the least. It was done with such incredible skill that the whole country was caught up in the Star Trek and in the Star Wars, I should say, bonanza of the summer of 1977. We're going to take a little break, and we'll be right back.
This is Carlos Quedes, harpist, and I would like to see you guys this Saturday night at Nola Brasserie Authentic Cajun and Creole Restaurant, located at 1201 Main Street, downtown Dallas. I'll be performing instrumental high-energy jazz at 7:30 until midnight. So make your reservation today at 469-872-1820.
My good friend Carlos, what a great show he's put together over at NOLA. And Saturday nights, if you're looking for something to do, go over to NOLA and check out my friend Carlos. NOLA, N-O-L-A, right here in downtown Dallas. And he plays there every Saturday night. And the food is great, as well as the music of Carlos Quedes. So check him out. I think you're going to enjoy it a great deal and come back for more. I should point out something about Star Wars also, that there were a couple of movies that came after. In 1980, there was The Empire Strikes Back, which I thought was a pretty good movie, but again, it was the impact. The thing about these Star Wars movies is that you went to see them, and the plot wasn't that hot, as they say. The movie itself was not that something that you would forever think about, but the images of Star Wars, and I'm thinking The Empire Strikes Back, when you had these big, what appeared to be almost like camels walking, these gigantic metal camels that were walking. They were actually, I guess they were like big military machines that would fire at people. I just remember that scene from the beginning of that movie and saying to myself, man, this is incredible how well done this is. And then in 1983, you had the Return of the Jedi, and that one, I'm not really sure how good that one was. Clearly, they were all good, I guess. If you were a fan of Star Wars, they were all pretty good. But to me, the first one, the Star Wars of 1977, was the one that clearly, I think, took the whole country by storm. And again, I go back to the idea that it was so well marketed. I think if you were doing a marketing class, you would definitely go back and see what these people did. I mean, look, by the summer of 1977, it seemed like every kid in the country was caught up. If you were a little girl, you were dressing up like Princess Leia. If you were a young boy, it was Luke Skywalker or Han Solo. I mean, these characters became a huge part of the culture. And obviously the way you do that is through very good marketing, and that's what they did. So you got to take your hat off, and if you're doing a study of marketing, I would have to think that Star Wars is one of the case studies you would look at as a movie, as something that definitely you would want to talk about in a marketing class. I have a post coming out hopefully on Friday where I talk about what's happening in Brazil. You know, those of you who follow Brazil understand that the last president of Brazil, who was reelected in 2012, this lady who was president of Brazil was ousted last summer for corruption. I mean, she was involved in all kinds of corruption. So she was forced out of office. She was replaced, I believe, by her vice president, who was Mr. Temer, who is now the president of Brazil. It appears that he's involved in a lot of corruption as well. In fact, the protest in Brazil got so bad a couple of days ago that they had to send the army out to put down these protests. And I have a post about this, hopefully, coming out on Friday, where I talk about what is happening down there. First of all, I think you're having now a case of corruption out of control. I just think that the people of Brazil are fed up with the corruption. They're fed up with what is happening in the country, and they're simply saying enough is enough. We're just not going to put up with any more corruption. On top of that, you have a very bad economy. And this is really, I think, that what is driving so much of this. Brazil right now has the worst recession that they've ever had in quite some time, perhaps decades, since they've had a recession like this. Economic growth in 2016 was negative. It doesn't look to get any better this year. And I believe the lack of an economic program, or the lack of economic activity, is really what is poisoning the atmosphere. You know, I had a Brazilian friend say to me, you know, it's one thing for them to be corrupt when the economy is booming. It's quite another thing for them to be stealing all that money when everybody else is suffering so much. Now, in Brazil, I think the situation that you have in Brazil is one, frankly, of what we like to call crony capitalism, where you have this corrupt relationship between business, between the public sector, and between the unions. And it's a very corrupt relationship, and I think it's finally beginning to fall apart. How bad is it going to get? I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if the president of Brazil has to resign and move on like his predecessor had to do a few months ago. Let me say a couple of words about this situation in Europe with the Manchester shooting. Absolutely horrific situation. I really hope that the countries of Europe finally begin to realize that they've got a cancer and they've got to deal with it, and they're going to have to deal with it with more than just simply giving speeches about how terrible it is to kill these young girls. They're going to have to get more active. They're going to have to go into some of these neighborhoods and really, really clear out some of the people who are engaging in not just the actual terrorist act itself, because by that time it's too late, but a lot of the people who are talking in these religious centers, who are clearly training these people to go out and commit these horrific acts. I think the continent has to look at itself and say, do we want to protect our people, or do we want to be politically correct? Well, you can't do both. You cannot be politically correct and protect your people. So they need to do something about that. And one more thing about the trip to Europe. President Trump today said some things to NATO publicly that, frankly, I know that other presidents have publicly said or privately said these things, but I'm glad to hear that President Trump is saying them in public, and that is that NATO has to carry its own weight. When you have the majority of the countries, they're not paying, or actually they don't pay money. What they do is they have to have 2% of their GDP directly to military, or the equivalent 2% of their GDP has to be military spending. Most of these countries are not doing that, and as a consequence, what you're seeing is a lot of countries getting a free ride from the United States. We defend them, and I think the American people are fed up with that. And so in this respect, I think President Trump is exactly right, and I hope he takes it to them publicly. It would be nice if we could do this in private. But the reality is we've been doing this in private for a long time, and it doesn't seem to do anything. It doesn't seem to fix anything, and that's one of the reasons why I support what President Trump is saying to many of these individuals. Let me say hello to our friend Frank Burke. How are you, Frank?
Well, thank you, Silvio. I apologize for being a little late to the show today.
No problem. It must have been something exciting up in Wisconsin.
Nothing's ever that exciting.
No, okay. I was talking a little bit during my conversation about Star Wars at the beginning that I really think Star Wars, Frank, was more than a movie, and that's why I wanted you to put in your thoughts on it, because obviously it was a movie, to say the least. But what I really saw with Star Wars was a marketing campaign or marketing bonanza like I had not seen before. When that movie came out literally 40 years ago today, I don't know that anybody thought that in 3 or 4 months every kid in the country was going to be Luke Skywalker and every little girl was going to be Princess Leia, and that there would even be the music of Star Wars would be danced in discotheques. I mean, it was amazing what they did, and I really think that's the success story of Star Wars. You know, the marketing bonanza that came because of it, Frank.
Well, you know, I think you're absolutely right, Silvio, and I think there are, if I could, you know, talk about the practical and the psychological aspects of it. From the practical aspects, I think one of the things that really got it going was the fact that people saw Steven Spielberg make a huge amount of money from not Close Encounter, but E.T., because of the merchandising. The E.T. dolls, E.T. equipment, E.T. lunchboxes, you name it. And so Lucas, when he was preparing Star Wars, anticipated a similar thing. And I know that Kenner Toys in Cincinnati had the contract, I believe, for most of the action figures and the incredibly detailed models of spaceships and things that were there. And they were operating under, like, you know, DEFCON 5 security. I mean, nobody got a look at that stuff until the time, and they made millions of things. So the pre-planning was already that when the movie was launched, bang, everything was on the shelves, all the merchandise was there. It was incredibly visible, and you weren't just seeing posters and ads for the movies, you were seeing ads for the action figures, the games, all the merchandising adjuncts that were part of it. And yeah. I think that just one other thing, and that's that from a psychological viewpoint, I think that they were very ready for this. The public was ready for this. You'd come through the Jimmy Carter administration and, you know, the American malaise and all that negativism, the Arabs pushing us around and the oil thing in the early 70s. And political correctness was beginning to make itself felt. And here suddenly there was this movie about good versus evil, and good is the underdog, the Rebel Alliance, and evil is Darth Vader and the Death Star and all this kind of stuff. So Lucas said that he took the idea, in large measure, from the old serials that used to be on in the 1940s. With, you know, the Crimson Ghost was one, and Radar Men from the Moon was another, and you know, it just worked. It was one action sequence after another.
Well, you know, it's interesting because I saw the movie that summer, and I have to tell you that I've seen it even a couple more times since, just to make sure that my first reaction was correct. Because I really didn't think it was that the script itself. I mean, the storyline. I didn't think it was that great. I mean, as I said, I've seen better black and white science fiction films at 2:00 in the morning. Really, from the standpoint of, I mean, the script itself. I don't mean the characters and all that. I thought the characters were very clever, but I just thought it was the script itself. We've seen it before 100 times, but you may be right about the timing of it. That it was a time when people wanted to see good and evil. Kind of there was no moral equivalency or hazy. We understand your pain kind of thing. No, it was good and evil, very clearly detailed. Now, when I saw the movie that was the second movie in the series, Empire Strikes Back, I remember going to see that when it came out. I was again just taken back by that first scene. When the movie starts and you have these big that appear to be camel-looking metal figures.
Yes.
I mean,
right.
I was just sitting. I don't know what they were called, okay, but I was
think
sitting
they were
there
the
saying,
Akax, weren't they?
Yeah, whatever. I don't remember exactly the name, but I kept saying to myself, this is really clever. I mean, this is fantastic. I mean, for the movie to start like this, and for the whole action of it, I thought was fantastic. I didn't go that crazy for the Return of the Jedi, but I have to say that you're exactly right. I think the country was looking for something like this. Now, you having been, spent a lot of your time in marketing, know that just because you think something is going to work, it doesn't always work. There are times when, a lot of those toys could have ended up in a warehouse somewhere because nobody bought them. So obviously the movie connected, but would you agree with me, Frank, that it connected because the characters were so interesting? I mean, you got C3, PD, R2,
right.
D2. I mean, who's not going to like those types of characters?
Well, you're right. You're absolutely right, Silvio. And, you had that. What people really went nuts about was the bar scene in the spaceport, where you had all these strange creatures sitting at tables having drinks. I mean, anybody who's ever been to an airport at that time could identify with that scene. But I have to say, the thing that still amazes me most about it is the longevity of it. My kids, the one, Aaron was born in 1974, I believe. And so he was just a little kid when he saw it for the first time. Daniel was born in 1979. They are still Star Wars fanatics. They have owned every different version of that movie that has come out on tape and CD. They have the books. They still talk about it. I mean, it's become intergenerational.
Right, and I think that again goes back to the marketing of it. That they clearly, they once they put this in our hands, we just couldn't have enough of it. And I remember a few months after the movie was released in the fall, into the winter of '77, you had actually a record that made it to number one. The theme of Star Wars, but with a disco flavor. So you had discotheques across the country. People were dancing. Young people were dancing to the music of Star Wars. It was just something that, again, I don't think they could have planned. You can plan things only so much. But I bet you that they had no idea that it would be as big as it was. They figured, well, we'll be happy if we can, keep people entertained that summer and, sell a few figures, and we'll be happy with that. But they had no idea that this would turn out to what it is. I mentioned before you came on that the movie made $461 million in 40 years ago. International figures were $800 million. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money today, but that was a lot of money back then. I mean, you're talking a mega success story, Frank.
Oh, absolutely. You definitely are. And, I think it's funny about that, and I agree with you, because I was just reading about The Godfather And during the making of The Godfather, a lot of the people who were the leads in it, the stars, thought that this thing was going to flop. And I'm talking about Godfather 1. And then suddenly here they are with a movie that's become like the all-time American classic. It's and of course that too was out of the 70s.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, what other movie. You're right, The Godfather clearly, or the expectations or exceeded expectations. Another movie too was Saturday Night Fever. That came about 6 months later after this one, and that movie was supposed to be a low budget film that became nothing but low budget at all. And then of course American Graffiti was another one of those low budget films that exceeded expectations. But I just, when I look back at Star Wars, first of all, hard to believe it was 40 years ago, Frank. I mean, where did the time go? But I just
you're making a mistake there. It's nowhere near 40 years, Silvio.
Okay. I guess my math is incorrect, right? I'll just
blame
it on the
we're
math.
Not that old.
Yeah. But I have a feeling if I had to predict, I would say that in 50 years, for example, when you and I are gone, but let's say that would be 2067, whatever, or 2167, or 2177, let's say. I have a feeling that a lot more people than we could imagine will be celebrating the 100th anniversary of Star Wars. I just have a feeling that there will be people saying, "Oh my gosh, 100 years ago this great thing was released," and I'm sure there'll be another. There'll be special, however they do it in the future, what kind of, how they present it, I don't know. But they will remember the 100th anniversary of Star Wars, Frank.
Well, I think you're very right, Silvio. I think you're totally correct in that. But I think there's something, a couple of points to be made about it, and one of them is the fact that in doing American Graffiti, George Lucas learned the importance of characterizations. If you look at that, that could have been about just a nondescript bunch of teenagers and sailed along on the music. But the reality was that those were strongly defined characters. And that's the magic that he brought over to Star Wars. The other thing, too, was the fact that if you look at what was going on at the time, the number of fans that Star Trek, the television show, had, and the fact that the people at NASA were literally studying the structure of the fictional Enterprise, their spaceship. They were very smart in designing the spacecrafts in ways that nobody had ever thought of. Everything space-wise prior to that had always been rather sleek and streamlined. And here were these things that had incredible details on the exterior, very pebbly and bumpy looking. So they really created something that was very different from what the normal expectations would have been. And I think that helped the movie a lot.
Yes, because I think by that time, you're right. I hadn't thought about the Star. I'm glad you brought up Star Trek, because I hadn't thought about the connection to Star Trek. By that time, 1977, Star Trek was actually doing well. It didn't do well when it first came out, as you may remember. In fact, there was even talk of dropping the series, but Desilu, the studio, kept up with it and kept fighting for it. But the truth is that by 1977, Star Trek was a popular rerun, to say the least. There may have been Star Trek movies as well. And so I think that, the people making Star Wars must have seen that and said there is a market for that kind of a movie with interesting characters. So I think you're right. I think your point about Star Trek is really a good one, because in many ways it's very similar. Now, Star Trek, the television series, I don't remember had the same good versus evil idea. I could be wrong. I may be missing some of it. But Star Trek, I mean, in Star Trek, you knew who the good guy was and you knew who the bad guy was, and you were cheering in the theater for the good guy. At least I was, Frank.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And you know, when you go back to the Star Wars, the prequels and things like that were nowhere near as strong as the original 3 episodes. I think that and nowhere near as well received. I think that a big part of that was the fact that because the movie was so honored for all its special effects, Lucas, or whoever it was also with him that was producing it, got hooked into just doing more one special effect after another, and forgot that the really great element that you can't do without is the story. The stories were a lot weaker than the original one.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. There were 3 movies, I guess, of the series Star Wars. There may have been others, but 3 that had the characters. There may have been others later.
Yes.
But what I find fascinating is how, they've taken advantage of every technological advance. Not just in the video sense, but also now you got computer games. You've got other things that come from that. And when this young woman passed away, I can't think of her name right now, the lady who played
Carrie Fisher,
Princess,
yes.
Carrie Fisher, yeah. When she passed away recently, I think in most people's minds, it was the princess. The main character that she played was the princess. I know she had other movies that she made as well, but at least for me personally, that's who I always identified her with. Other movies, I really didn't, but her role as the princess in Star Wars, that's what I always thought of her. Even Harrison Ford, who is, I think, Han Solo in the show, that role, I mean, he's been in lots of other movies, but I always think of Harrison Ford as Han Solo, Frank.
Yes, absolutely. I think those people became very, very strongly identified with their characters, and it really was a phenomenal thing. Well, it's funny because again, as you're mentioning the good against evil, the story here, that's so important. As the French playwright Molière once said, "All I need for theater is a platform and a passion or two." And I think the passion was there in Star Wars, and that's what made the whole thing click. Everybody wanted to be Luke Skywalker or Han Solo, and just because when you're going into the world of political correctness, what kind of games did kids used to play? American soldiers and Nazis, cowboys and Indians. And oh my God, we can't have bad guys. We can't have real, honest-to-goodness, historical human being bad guys. But in Star Wars, hey, you can have evil people from another planet. Now you're not offending anybody.
Right, that's right. No, you're exactly right. And I always thought one of the most hilarious things about Darth Vader was how often he would be associated with the bad, the evil in politics.
Yes,
I know they did it. They did it with Dick Cheney, and I'm sure they did it with somebody else. I don't, I'm sure somebody in the left has been painted as Darth Vader, but I think Harry Reid may have been. So it just seems like Darth Vader became everybody's favorite villain. And
definitely,
and that in itself is quite an accomplishment for the film. Frank, what I like to do is maybe get together after Memorial Day and catch up with some of the politics. We didn't have much of a chance today because we started a bit late. So if you would make a date with me sometime next week, and we'll get into the politics. I'm anxious to get your reaction to everything that's happening, quite a bit to say the least. It always seems to be quite a bit with the Trump administration. But if we could make a date sometime next week, and we can talk a little bit more about the politics of everything else that's going on. I sent you an email. I just want to quickly bring this up. I don't know if you have a the answer to this question. But today is the anniversary of the ordination of Father Stephen. I think it's Baden. How you pronounce it? Father Stephen Theodore Baden, Badin. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Who became the first Catholic priest ordained in the United States, not in North America, but in the country of the United States after we adopted the Constitution. And I've read something that he has a connection to Notre Dame. Do you know anything about that?
That I do not.
Yeah, well, maybe we can bring that up in the next show, because I've read something that he has a connection to Notre Dame University, but I didn't have time today to research it. But if maybe in our next show we can deal with that, because it's a fascinating story. The first Catholic priest ordained in the United States, and the key word is, of course, United States, not the colonies, where I'm sure there are others who were ordained. And I thought it was interesting, after he became ordained, his first assignment was the Kentucky Territory. That must have been interesting.
Yes, indeed. That was that was a rough assignment in those days.
Yeah, that's right. That's not like going to your suburban church.
Well, if I can.
Sure, go ahead.
If I can bring in just a quick thing about that, about the early settlement of the United States. One of the fascinating things is, of course, that the avenue of settlement was the Ohio River. And among the Indian tribes of that time, they would fight each other for land. They would fight each other for, insults or whatever. Or for rights in a particular place. But Kentucky was reserved. Kentucky was the sacred hunting grounds. So any member of any tribe could go into Kentucky and hunt and bring back food for their families totally unmolested by any other Indian. All the tribes had kind of agreed to that. So where did the whites first decide to settle? On the sacred land in Kentucky.
Not a bad idea. Not a bad idea. At least they had lots of deer to shoot, without any without any problem. Have a great Memorial Day, Frank, and we'll get together next week. I'm anxious to hear a lot of your thoughts about what's going on in the politics. We'll reconnect next week. How's that?
That sounds great. You too, and God bless you and all of our veterans and their families.
Yes. Absolutely. You're exactly right. Frank Burke, we have a link to his website or to his book in the show information, his book about the media and the justice system. Very interesting book. Well, that's going to do it, folks. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed our look back at this amazing movie, Star Wars, released literally 40 years ago today in the American movies. We'll talk to you later. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas.